Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I'm just going to allow a few seconds for people to connect, as I can see there are quite a few people just connecting. So I'm just going to give it 30 seconds and then we will kick off. Okay, I can see there are a few people connected, so we will start. So hello everyone, and welcome to today's IAB Europe's Industry Insider webinar with PubMatic. We're so delighted to have you all here today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Marie-Claire Puffett. I'm the Marketing and Insights Director here at IAB Europe. And for those of you that are new to Industry Insider, it's an IAB Europe webinar format that we host to really provide you some real learnings and insights from industry leading companies. So today we're going to be exploring the topic of commerce media, which has undoubtedly been one of the most kind of eagerly and most discussed emerging sectors in the digital ad industry over the last couple of years. So I'm very excited to have PubMatic here with us to share some insights from their latest commerce media research. And before we go into that, we're going to kick off with an overview of the commerce media landscape from our very own chief economist, Daniel Knapp. And then Babs Kahindi is going to provide a deep dive into the PubMatic research. And then after that, we're going to be joined, Daniel, Babs, and myself, going to be joined by Christina Kagner from Publicis Commerce and Justin Sandy from Bowl.com for a panel discussion. So lots to come. But before I hand over to Daniel, please just remember that you can submit your questions for the speakers today in the Q&A box in the Zoom window. So if you have any questions, please do send them in via the Q&A box. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Claire, and welcome everybody. I would like to give a just 5-minute whistle-stop tour of the exploding commerce media landscape in Europe. A few data points on how big is it, how fast is it going to grow. I'm going to close with a few challenges, as this is the year where commerce media, I think, moves beyond the hype and enters its period of adolescence. And with that, of course, comes expectations around certain maturity, things that brands, agencies, tech providers, and retailers need to do to really lift this market to the next level. So without further ado, let's dive in. I think it's important to note that we saw this sudden contraction of e-commerce spend after the pandemic. Things were normalizing, so the e-commerce share of overall retail sales was kind of reversing back to the mean. And you can see this here on this chart from the UK. This is data from the National Statistics Office, where we can see overall e-commerce sales growing in a fairly linear way with certain peak periods every year. Then we saw this classic explosion of a 4-year evolution in 3 months compressed. But we saw that this pandemic boom was fairly short-lived, and we saw a downward correction again of e-commerce spend as the economy opened up again. Now, interestingly, when we look at the latest data from Christmas sales, and also as we're going back into January 2023, we can see a next wave of acceleration, meaning that for many consumers now, e-commerce has become a normalized way of buying goods and services, and we're seeing an uptick again. So it means that this downward correction that we saw shouldn't be an indication of a more muted environment for e-commerce. On the contrary, there's more acceleration, and this is good news for commerce media, or as I predominantly call it here, retail media in this presentation. If we look at recent company results, and Q4 results are just being published, I have here Q3, the picture doesn't change much in terms of the message that I would like to convey, is that we see shifting trends happening, where we saw the growth engines, the former growth engines of the digital ad market, i.e. those companies that have outperformed, actually now performing in line with or below the market. And we see other types of companies, think of an Amazon, Zalando, with here an example, Criteo or Walmart, all publishing retail media performance results. We can see a vastly different picture with double-digit growth despite economic headwinds, and also despite the signal loss, which is plaguing so much of the digital ad industry. And this is really a bellwether for the retail media or commerce media opportunity. Many of you are familiar with this chart. I'm going to just remind you again. This is self-declared ambitions by companies. And number one, how much currently are they already making on retail commerce media, and what and where do they want to go? And we see it's really an exponential journey forward. And just recently, Uber published its Q4 results. And overall, looking at the year 2022, they're now seeing an advertising run rate of $500 million US. Of course, run rate isn't revenue, but this really means that Uber might be on track to actually reach more than the declared 1 billion in 2024. We can also see European retailers are lagging behind the US. Just it's a scale issue, and also that the market is less mature. But if we take a long-term or mid-term perspective, even we can see that we are reaching extremely significant numbers not too far in the future. I think fundamentally, and the company results I mentioned have illustrated this, we're moving towards a more multipolar world of digital advertising in which retail media plays a crucial role. We have often heard of the duopoly or even the triopoly. And if we look at the duopoly, we modeled this for IAB Europe, we can see, yes, the duopoly was extremely important, but we're seeing a reduction of the share of the total digital advertising pie that they have. Of course, Amazon is growing, but also this other segment here is growing in share. And in there, we have retail media, non-Amazon, we have CTV in there, video and so forth, which are key growth drivers. If we isolate this a little bit and look at where is growth coming from 2022, we can see this other segment here producing healthy growth of around 16%. And in this other segment, the growth drivers majorly in here is retail or commerce media, as that market today in Europe is already larger than the CTV market. We expect CTV market to be around 2.4 billion euros, whereas the retail or commerce media market is much larger at around 10 billion already. With a healthy range of retailers in Europe, here we can see the kind of their size in terms of online gross merchandise value. So significant potential in this multipolar world to monetize retail media and to provide advertisers with a vast range of different outlets across categories, from grocery to DIY to consumer electronics, etc. And I mentioned these, in 2022, kind of 10 billion. If we go back to 2021, it was around 8 billion. And just to contextualize this a little bit, that was as much as the newspaper print ad industry in 2021. And fast forward into 2026, it is large as linear TV advertising. So we're in this paradoxical situation where retail media or commerce media is both an emerging channel in the sense that there's lack of standards, hyper-fragmentation, etc. But really from a spend perspective, it's really not an emerging channel anymore. We put out this fairly bold statement at IAB Europe in October 2022. We're pleased to hear that we're not the only ones to see potential in this market. So the Publicis CEO in the latest earnings calls was actually issuing a similar prediction, saying that CPG companies will spend more on retail media than on linear TV by 2025. Of course, this is a little bit skewed to the US, but it really demonstrates the potential of this market. We see that the US is probably 3 to 4 years ahead, and that there's significant organic headroom for growth in Europe. And this chart here expresses this, I think, in a quite telling way, where we look at what percentage of overall e-commerce revenues generated in a market comes from retail or commerce media. In the US, it's 4.7%, and that kind of interestingly aligns very closely with the Amazon advertising share of their overall business. But in other markets, Germany, UK, lead in Europe, we can see it's more than going to double behind. So there's a lot of headroom in those markets. We can also see that really retail or commerce media is going fastly beyond Amazon. Amazon has a share in some markets it's 75%, in some markets it's even higher. But we can see that European endemics in particular, albeit from a much smaller base, are growing faster than the giant in the room. Also, crucially, we can see that there is a shift slowly coming towards offsite. We're seeing many retailers still today diversifying or professionalizing their on-site offerings, moving beyond simple plug-and-play solutions and kind of IO-based campaigns to slowly adopting more programmatic, increasing the demand pools that they're using. But crucially, we see that the mid to long-term growth opportunity goes beyond on-site and goes into off-site activation. So using that rich first-party data that retailers have in other kind of bottom funnel, mid funnel, and even upper funnel activities, be it in search, be it in social, in programmatic, CTV, and so forth. And recent partnerships that we saw in the industry, I think in the UK, Tesco, ITVX, etc., illustrate this point. So the picture is, of course, quite optimistic for retail media. But as I say, we're moving to a period of adolescence, and with that comes some key questions to really move this market ahead and professionalize it further. So one thing that we're seeing is on the top left here, a strong growth in the number of retailers that are offering commerce media solutions. We're currently counting around 89 of those in Europe, and that's a massive jump just from about 2 years ago. But with this fragmentation, of course, comes the question on how do I, as an advertiser, orchestrate the spend? Which retailers do I really work with? And this fragmentation makes decisioning extremely difficult, as each retailer has different metrics available. And we can also see a recent study from the ANA in the US about retail media networks, what do buyers think? And we can really see that the issue of lack of standardization, 57% here mentioned this as a big challenge on the right here. So this market needs to move further ahead. We need to increase the interoperability and move beyond this walled gardenization that many retailers are embarking on currently, joint standards, measurement, and the ability to buy across them. We also need to widen the pool of advertisers before we talk about non-endemic, even endemic advertisers. And actually working programmatically, going beyond IO-based manual campaigns is a crucial component of that. Programmatic on-site, we still find, is very much in its infancy in Europe, where other retailers in the US are much further ahead. In, for instance, thinking about, do I deploy an SSP instance, et cetera, et cetera. We also see that some advertisers are in a kind of must-buy mode. They kind of feel sometimes forced to buy through their trade deals rather than a want to buy, meaning offerings, metrics need to be much more compelling. And we can also see that increasingly retail media, there's a pressure from the buy side to really integrate online on-site, online off-site, but also the in-store opportunity as well into a holistic offering. And there's also still a lack of clarity on responsibilities, who buys from which budgets, which pools on the advertiser and agency side. And to really reach this market size of as big as TV in 2026, these are some of the challenges that must be addressed to turn these forecasts into reality. And I'm very confident that we're going to discuss this in more detail on the panel. And with that, thank you very much. And back to Marie-Claire.
Thanks, Daniel. That's a great starting point for understanding retail media, commerce media in Europe. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Babs to give us a bit of a deep dive into the recent PubMatic research on commerce media.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Marie-Claire, and always great to see Daniel present, although a little bit harder going after him. So give me a second and I'll just share my screen. Here we go. Okay, so thanks again, Marie-Claire. I'm Babs Kaney and I lead our commerce media efforts for PubMatic and EMEA. And as Marie-Claire said, I'd just like to take the next sort of 10 minutes or so to take you through some of the highlights of the recent research we completed in partnership with ExchangeWire around the evolution of commerce media in Europe. So before I get into that, though, I just thought it might be worthwhile just giving you some of the insight into why we undertook this research in the first place. You know, as Daniel's presentation has shown, as we're all aware, commerce media has definitely been one of the hottest growth areas across the industry over the last couple of years. And also we know that brands are really interested in figuring out how they can efficiently advertise through this channel. And as they look to connect with valuable audience data and benefit from more closed loop reporting, this is going to become even more so as we grow through the future. And as most of the conversations so far have really heavily focused on the buy side benefits, we were really interested in looking at things from a retailer perspective and making sure that they were included in the conversation as well. And the commerce media landscape in EMEA is incredibly diverse. I mean, we saw some of the data that was just shared there by Daniel, but it's an incredibly diverse and fragmented marketplace. So we really wanted to take into account the impact of those local nuances, and that was really key for us behind this research as well. And before I delve into this any further, I think it's, and again, it came out in Daniel's presentation as well. I think it's worth sort of coming to some sort of common agreements and common definitions across the industry of how we refer to commerce media. Is it commerce media, or is it retail media, or is it shopper marketing, or any of the various terms that individual companies are using to refer to this sort of marketing? This is something that we've heard time and time again from a load of the companies that we've been in conversation with. But we've made an attempt to define it. And we believe that commerce media is the all-encompassing term that captures all elements of this category. So it covers all the advertising and the data that's traded on or around the digital real estate where goods and services can be bought or sold. And that's regardless of platform or format. And in turn, commerce media companies are those that exist to sell goods and services to their customers, also have access to transaction data, which they can then make available for both on and offsite targeting to buyers. So this could include a Deliveroo or a Ticketmaster, as much as it would include categories like social commerce. And retailers then are a subcategory within the wider commerce umbrella. So this could be your more traditional retail brands like a Tesco's or a Carrefour, for instance. But for this piece of research, we've sort of used the terms interchangeably. So you'll hear me refer to them through the deck as we go along as either commerce or retail. So on to some of the highlights of the research. And I think to start off, what we found really interesting was that the overwhelming majority of the European retailers that we surveyed are already generating revenue from commerce media activity. And about 16% of those who were generating revenue from commerce media activity, almost 2/3 of their ad revenue was specifically directed against commerce media. And where these companies were not currently running digital advertising on their properties, about 70% of them have stated that they're planning on leaning into the commerce media opportunity in the future. I think all of this goes to highlight that there's a vast opportunity that these companies believe that commerce media will bring to their businesses. And looking across the region, it was interesting to note, and especially in light of some of the data that Daniel shared, that the UK was one of the regions that is seeing the most activity in commerce media today. So with almost 90% of those surveyed are generating at least 20% of their digital ad revenue through this channel. And this is in contrast with a market like Spain, where it sits at just under 60%. But if we look at the general market trends and the way that both of these regions sort of look at commerce media and media in general, I think, because of that similarity, all of this again shows that there's a huge opportunity for commerce media and a whole load of runway for Spain as well as a market. And then we asked individually about their sales strategy and their approach to commerce media. And I think all surveyed retailers do plan to include some form of direct sales as part of their commerce media efforts. Though programmatic, as Daniel said, is still in its infancy, it is still proving to be incredibly attractive to many of these commerce companies across the region. So while we still have a minority of retailers who are averse to any form of inventory trading via RTB, I think it was very interesting that we saw that a larger proportion were hoping to generate about 80+% of their commerce media revenue directly via RTB, which again, I think is a really encouraging sign for the growth of the market. And when we look ahead to 2023, here we noted that the majority of European commerce companies are either planning to increase their commerce media investments or maintain current levels over the coming year. This is even more prevalent with the larger retailers, as you would imagine, especially versus some of the smaller players. And this is with a backdrop of the possible global recession and general market insecurities, I think really, again, just points to the fact that these brands believe that brands believe that they are still looking for a secure channel with proven ROI as a place to invest their ad dollars. And then we also looked at some of the common themes against what was driving this growth and this increase in investment. And I'll pull a couple out here just for reference. But alongside brand safety, which we would expect, one of the main points that we saw was that retailers still really view commerce media as a way to ensure more personalized and better targeted ads for their users. They also cited a need in expanding their own owned and operated advertising channels, as well as attracting new brand partners to their sites. This, coupled with their ability to cross and upsell their users, as well as creating a really valuable new revenue stream. These were some of the reasons that were repeatedly cited through the research by the surveyed companies. And we looked at some of the barriers that could potentially impact this growth and this investment. And similar to some of those drivers, there were some commonalities in terms of the themes that came out here as well. Unsurprisingly, given the current economic climate, concerns around the cost of technology was a definite call out. We saw that repeatedly come through in the research. And also attracting and hiring the right sort of talent to ensure that these companies were properly staffed up in this for commerce media was another issue that was highlighted. And given the general level of concern around granting access to their users, protecting customer data and privacy was also unsurprisingly cited as a key barrier as well. So there were other notable call-outs here, but I think, all of this serves to highlight the need for us as an industry to really adopt a multifaceted approach and make sure that we can continue to encourage these retailers to invest in this area. And I touched on this slightly on the previous slide, but the anxieties around user data in general still remain a huge concern for commerce media companies. Over half of those surveyed spoke to this point. And many also expressed concerns around on-site user experience and the risk to diluting their core audience as they evolve their commerce media strategies, which again, I feel really speaks to the fact that there's a real cautiousness exhibited by these companies as they don't want to risk damaging the relationships that they've spent years building up and that loyal customer base that they really covet and want to nurture through their life. And we also asked generally around their attitudes towards collaboration. And I think this was shown previously by a couple of those challenges, but there's definitely an interest in partnering with experts in the field across all markets. This was a commonality. We had about 20% of the respondents showing that they're already working with a third-party provider in this arena. But there were differences across the regions, which I think were worth noting as well. So in France, for example, where companies in this region, commerce companies in this region, were stated that they were really open to working with third parties, slightly more so than their counterparts in, say, the other regions. They also then had the lowest proportion of the retailers who are currently doing so at the moment. Again, this is in contrast with markets like the UK, where we see there's about a third of those retailers who stated that they're already partnered with a third-party provider for their commerce media solutions. So as cost was cited as one of the main barriers to commerce media investment as a whole, it's not surprising that this was a key point cited as one of the influencing factors in deciding on partner selection. But it was also closely followed by data activation, and I feel that's a key point that will ring true throughout the evolution of commerce media as we go forward. But this points to the fact that retailers are really looking to maximize the value of their first-party data and making sure that they partner with a company that they feel can really help and support them in this area. And so as we look into the future, I just wanted to highlight a few final key takeouts of our research. Because as the market develops, we believe that it's the brands and the agencies who've really adopted a programmatic first approach that are really going to drive the acceleration towards an automated, data-driven trading environment for commerce media. Future commerce media solutions will need to be powered by the access to that first-party data, that rich first-party data that will deliver greater efficiency and more effectiveness for the brands advertising on. And the technology and data will continue to empower those brands to think less of the role of commerce media network as a bottom of the funnel investment channel, but more about the role of retailers and commerce companies across the entire marketing funnel to drive their ROI. And finally, it's clear that while there's no one-size-fits-all model for commerce media, especially in a region as diverse as Europe, the various market nuances present both challenges and opportunities for brands and retailers alike. And I think our future growth will be dictated by our ability as an industry to bring together both ends of that spectrum, to connect both brands and retailer audiences in a way that takes into account concerns around data privacy, but also heightens targeting accuracy. And I think as tech partners, we're going to play a crucial role in this overall ecosystem, offering customizable solutions that can be tailored according to the different priorities and different needs for each side of the equation of both buyers and sellers. So as I said, this was only a very brief snapshot of the wider report, which Marie-Claire's promised to add a link to in the chat, so everyone will have access to. But the report is out, and anyone who wishes to connect with me after this, I'd be more than happy to sit and discuss with you and take you through the wider report in more detail. So look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Babs, and yeah, great whistle-stop tour of the report. And I think I've just put a link in the chat box, so hopefully everyone can see that and feel free to click through and download the report. So I'm very delighted now to be joined by a panel of experts on commerce media. So I'm just making sure everyone's got their video on. We can see you all. Perfect. Cool. So in order to kick off, I would just like to ask each of you to introduce yourself, explain your role within the retail media ecosystem, and at the same time, can you please explain what you think the key driving force is behind the growth of commerce media today in Europe? So I'm going to start with Justin, if that's okay.
Yes, definitely okay. And thank you very much for having me in this discussion. And I think I'm going to cheat a little bit, Marie-Claire, because I've got 4 key driving forces in my head. So hopefully it's not too much. So, but I'm Justin. I work at bol.com. It's a Dutch e-commerce platform, and it's the biggest in the Netherlands and Belgium. And I'm responsible there for building up the retail media business. So I am definitely connected to this topic for over 5 years right now. And I saw a little bit the growth of retail media in the Netherlands itself. So that's a little bit about me. And I think the key driving forces, as said, I think there are a couple, of course. And I would pick, of course, the first-party data. It's mentioned already a lot of times. But that's really something that distinguishes retail media from other media. It's a trusted environment, I guess. It's the measurement possibilities, the closed loop measurement possibilities. I said possibilities because it's very hard to get that working, but it is a good promise. And finally, I think the scattered media right now and the inflation, for example, on TV and in other media. So investing in other media is getting much more expensive. So advertisers are really looking for other channels where they can really see what the advertising will bring them. So what it costs, but also what you get back from it. So that fuels retail media, in my opinion. So that was a little bit my idea.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to Christina next, if that's okay.
Thank you. So my name is Christina Kagner. I'm on the Publicis Commerce Global team based out in London. My role in the organization is essentially looking at how we use technology to enable a lot of our commerce and retail endeavors. I really, really love it. And I think the driving force is, for me, a combination of different things. One is with the way that consumers have shopped the last few years, we've seen a drastic change in consumer expectation. And that consumer expectation has forced retailers and commerce service providers to really think about the user experience. How do they use technology to enable that and move it forward? And I love what Justin said about audience data and first party, because there's such a big space right now, not just for personalization, which we've been talking about for years, but for also actually meeting consumer demand and consumer expectations, given the landscape is what it is today.
Great, thank you. Babs?
Thanks. So you've all briefly met me earlier, but I think I'll just go into my sort of thoughts around the key driving forces behind the growth. So I think I touched on a few of them through the deck there, but I was trying to think. The reality is that there's just going to be a combination of those things, as Christina said, but I think, if we look at the way that advertising is transforming commerce media, or that is going to be transformed by commerce media, we'll be able to move from a world where people have relied on, kind of very one-dimensional signal-based activity based on a user's past behavior. And I think the fact that we can now implement, very, very sort of rich transactional data that will offer more effective targeting capability and really transform the way that people look at shopping and behavioral data and use that to transform into actionable insights. These are the elements that I feel will allow brands to really drive their investment in this area and really allow the retailers to reap the benefits of all of that data and the audience relationships that they have as well.
Thanks, Babs. Daniel.
Yeah, so you've met me too, and I'm mainly taken observer role in this ecosystem. And coming last among such distinguished experts, of course, means that the core points have already been discussed. And there might just be one thing that I would like to add, which is less from a consumer or from an advertiser perspective, but more from the retail perspective, so not the media perspective. We all know advertising is a high margin business, 60 to 80% on site. And many retailers, in particular those with primarily brick and mortar operations, were forced to digitize overnight during the pandemic. This cost huge amounts of money. And that often meant that these operations were not profitable. High expenditure went into this. And what we are seeing now is that advertising for those digitizing retailers, and also for e-com native retailers who want to expand their offerings, it's not a nice to have, but the high margin nature of the business means that advertising funds overall digital investment and innovation. And this is, I think, despite the fact that, as Babs, I think, illustrated very clearly, that there's some internal pushback, of course, on advertising and some misconceptions and some skepticisms. But overall, it's a driver for the digitization of the retail business.
Thanks, Daniel. I see Justin nodding away there. So lots of agreement, I think. So just before we go into the rest of the other questions, I think it might be useful just to kind of dive a little bit into the key difference between commerce media and retail media. We're hearing a lot about both of those terms at the moment in the industry, and it might just be good to just kind of, and Babs, you did touch on this a little bit in your presentation as well, I know, but just to clarify for the audience, what are we talking about and what's the key difference? Babs, I'm gonna start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and honestly, this is fascinating, and I think even if we look at how we've sort of evolved in our thinking around, sort of retail and commerce, that's what led us to the definitions that I sort of took people through earlier this afternoon. But we know that it is a struggle, not just from just purely a naming convention, but just the way that people conceptualize what this is and what impact it will have for their business. But so, we've tried to look at it as with the broadest catch-all that we can, hence commerce media being that catch-all. We feel that the difference being retail sits as a subset within that. It allows us to take into all of the elements that will really drive commerce media forward. We've talked about the data, we've talked about the way that brands want to, personalize and target target the consumers in a commerce media environment. I think all of that needs to take into account all of the different variations of commerce media. So whether that's, sort of retail brands, traditional retail brands and traditional shopping networks, or it's brands like a Deliveroo or a Ticketmaster, I think all of that data flows into the general commerce ecosystem, and then retail specifically just becomes another sort of qualifying subset within that around the general commerce media platform.
Thanks, Babs. Justin, would you expand on that? Would you?
Yeah. So it's obviously we're talking about definitions here. So it's what you put in. Commerce media is quite broad, as Babs is explaining. So it encompasses everything. As I understand it correctly. But the way I would look at it, and that's obviously from a retail perspective. So I understand there's a difference between, let's say, us and TicketSwap, for example. But if we look at the retailer perspective, I would say there's a difference between, let's say, I would say commerce media is everything what's happening both, for example, in store and online, for example. So if you walk into Esso, so Ahold is our mother company. So we have a lot of supermarkets in the Netherlands, and over there you also see the wobblers, for example. Those are the funny things hanging in front of the products, and that's also media. I would say commerce media to me is that broad. It's everything related to show a product or show your brand within, let's say, within the retailer environment a little bit, and also perhaps a little bit outside. But that's trade skewed, I would say. And if I would say retail media, I'm thinking more about the marketing part of it. So the marketing side, so really it's about reaching target audiences. It's about showing brands not to everyone in the shop, but only to the specific people you would like to target. So it's really about that. And I think it's also a little bit more digital skewed over there.
Thanks, Justin. Christina, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm probably going to give a very media-centric answer because of what I look at every day. But to me, commerce media and retail media are really relatives. And the reason that I say that is retail media is like Justin and Babs both touched on, it's about the retail space. It's about making sure that you're present at the point of purchase, whatever that point of purchase is. It can be at the retailer, it can be in store, it can even be shoppable ads and shoppable experience. But what do we do to enable that commerce journey? So I mentioned in my intro, consumer expectations. There's a really big part of the journey that we have to consider, which is discovery. How do we introduce the consumer to the product? How do we move them along the funnel? How do we actually get them so when that point of purchase hits, it's not a surprise to them? And to me, commerce media is all of those activities through all of those different channels, which can be absolutely very lower funnel driven, but they can also be more upper and mid funnel driven, designed to really educate the consumer on what they can expect from you and from buying a product from you when they get to that point of purchase.
Okay, great, thank you. Daniel, obviously this is something we're looking at in our working group, but any thoughts?
Yeah. I think we'll continue to see different definitions by different players. It's a typical symptom of the advertising industry that definitions are skewed towards the business objectives, to single vendors within the ecosystem. I think we've heard very sensible arguments about what each term means and how they differ, and I would broadly agree with that. I think neither term is really perfect. And I think the retail media term is fairly specific, whereas the commerce term is all-encompassing. And with that, of course, there's always going to be a misunderstanding of what do we really mean by that. And personally, it might just be because I'm German and translating this into English. There seems to be a transactional connotation, even in the term commerce. And when we're thinking of some forward-looking retailers who say, we want to use our first-party data, either ourselves or via agencies, to not just do lower funnel campaigns or conversion, just product conversion-based campaigns, but really introduce that data more broadly into the campaign planning cycle to also reach non-endemic customers. I think the term commerce media doesn't capture that, and actually steers away from the broader opportunity of retailers and commerce players supplying their valuable data for more upper funnel and even planning-based activities. Maybe we'll see a third or fourth with merchant media too. So maybe there's going to be a fourth term emerging. So I think we're going to be, despite all our definitions attempt, being stuck in some kind of Babylonic impasse for quite a while.
Thanks, Daniel. Always the realist. Thank you. So from the PubMatic research, we saw that about a third of retailers cited better targeting and personalization of ads as a key driver. And obviously, you guys did touch on this at the beginning for investing in commerce media. So I'd just like to dive into a little bit about kind of how does commerce media actually enable this? So I'm gonna start with Christina, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. So I think commerce media enables this through quite a few different routes. We obviously have the consumer side of personalization, which is actually finding those relevant audiences, introducing them, moving them along the funnel, converting them, all those things that I talked about. But we also have the retailer side of personalization, which I think is critical, and it's something that we don't talk about nearly enough in the commerce media space. Retailers now have amazing resources, including dynamic pricing engines, including the ability to use audiences to bring in segments. And most importantly, when we think about how this gets to commerce media, retailers have a really great opportunity to actually connect brands to consumer segments that they didn't even know they needed. And I think, again, this is something that I'm incredibly passionate about, because in my space, looking at technology, there's been a lot of technology stacks that have talked about doing this for years. And now we're finally at the place where I would say commerce media has made us marketers mature enough to not just take advantage of this by checking the box and implementing a piece of technology, but by actually looking at the objectives that this might drive forward for our business and making the appropriate investments. That's why I loved the research that Babs presented, allowing us to really talk about how are we actually seeing this brought to life in real life applications today.
Great, thanks. Daniel, any thoughts on that? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I mean, the data promise is obvious, as Christina said, but I think a lot more needs to happen to really unlock the power of that. I think we have a lot of the building blocks there in theory, but it's highly, and I think Bab's research amazingly showed that as well, highly unevenly distributed amongst retailers, both in terms of knowledge about the market and the tools, the reliance on individual vendors, and also about the team and the availability to really execute those insights. And whereas many retailers are developing these solutions, again, there is a lack of coordination. And we see this in a walled gardenization of everything. And I think many retailers, for legitimate reason, are saying our data is extremely precious and we want to define our own way of how to use it and give it to our clients to enable all the things that Christina rightly said. But if everyone does it in their own way, and if there's a lack of interoperability, it diminishes, in my opinion, the value of data. So there needs to be a hybrid, some kind of porosity, some kind of hedged gardens, less walled gardens to really make sense of it. I also think that when we think of dynamic pricing, this is, has terrific potential. If we think about, how publishers in the news space adopted floor pricing and other things. But also, as Babs showed, the programmatic integrations are still fairly limited, and so is also the, I think, understanding within retailers of how to do proper yield management, for instance, and how do I connect my my retail media not just to the inventory available online, but also in the store, keyword omnichannel, and also how do I, for instance, introduce dynamic pricing when it comes to certain, product cycles, campaigns, let's say, not just Black Friday, but let's say pre-Christmas, Valentine's Day, and so forth. I think there's a lot of scope still for innovation. And the last point is, I think data needs to go both ways. We all mentioned ROAS and how advertisers invest more in retail media. Demonstrating the incremental value that retail media offers through data is going to be extremely important, which means going maybe beyond run-of-the-mill Excel-based reportings and having something more sophisticated so that brands can really see what value that precious retailer data really delivers to them.
Thanks, Daniel. Justin.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I may add to this, because these are exactly the challenges we also see, of course, as a retailer. So we have a lot of data, but data isn't basically nothing if you can't make it actionable, right? So you need to be able to make it actionable. You need to collect it in a good way, in a good sense, that we're not gonna give it away for free, because it's true. We would like to keep the data. But we would like to make it actionable for our advertisers. And then it's the problem, okay, via what channel? How can we offer it in the best way? So, for example, that agencies or advertisers can work with it and optimize with it. And that's really the challenge where we're in right now. And I think so there are more components with that, because there is a big opportunity as well, not only for, let's say, the advertising industry, but also for the retailers themselves. If you use your data correctly, then you would say, for example, 30% of our visitors, they're not, they're orientating. So they don't even want to buy directly. So they want to get another user experience on bol.com, for example. And the data tells us that, and we should be able to work with that. And then I can work out with Christina a beautiful plan for the specific advertiser that they can really show their brand to that specific consumer. And then we're really connecting the dots, I think.
Yeah. Perhaps would you add anything to those points?
I mean, the guys have really covered this in a great amount of depth, and Justin, I'll definitely follow up with you to talk about how we can help you with making that data more actionable. But I guess the one bit that I wanted to follow up on, and I love the fact that Christina sort of mentioned it, because it really kind of sparked a thought for me. But that as an industry, we're finally at a point where we can realize the promise that I used to say back at Teletext in many years ago. But the fact that we can now start delivering the right ad to the right person at the right time, again based on that data, the ability to see not just what they have been doing, but actually have actionable insights based on their actual their both transactional data, but also the way that they interact within the commerce landscape. So Christina also mentioned, using that data as a means of discoverability. So one of the things that I've always thought was really interesting is the ability to look at the data that's available within the commerce space. So one example that I always use is around a retailer, a general sort of general products retailer who's selling baby food, or who has a user who comes in buying baby food, nappies, kids' clothes, etc. Now that, in theory, makes that user or that segment of users perfect for Pampers, as they can fall into a new parent segment, and they become relevant for a Pampers. But it's we're now at the point where as long as we can make that data, transfer that data to the right advertisers, immediately that opens up a huge range of non-endemic brands who would also be interested in those users. So it could be Kia, who are just releasing their new family-friendly SUV, or it could be Virgin, who have a family holiday. There are lots of different ways that this data can really start to make the advertising smarter and help us really start delivering, and as I say, kind of meeting that promise of delivering the right ad to the right users.
Yeah, cool. Some really good examples there of what could be possible with this data. So just kind of keeping on the topic of kind of challenges then, and aside from this challenge around making data more actionable, what other kind of key challenges or hurdles do you guys think the industry needs to overcome? And obviously, Daniel, you touched a bit on this as well, to further enhance the commerce media landscape in Europe and to facilitate that growth that we saw was possible. I'm going to start with Daniel, if that's okay.
Sorry for only speaking about challenges. I need to have a more optimistic outlook. But the forecasts are optimistic. Well, we mentioned a few of those, and I think let's group those. So advertisers, what are advertiser challenges? Where do I buy? From which retailer? Do I go direct? Do I go via an agency? Where does the budget come from? Trade, digital advertising. How do I organize that internally? How do I avoid frictions? How can I make the trade budget kind of more measurable? How can I move from I have to buy, it's part of a trade deal, to something I want to buy? How can I actually buy retail media not in isolation as a single channel, but via the DSP that I use across other media channels so that it really gets integrated? I think for agencies, some of the challenges is, what is really the business model? What is our key role in retail media? Am I providing consulting services? Am I, in a sense, providing ad ops as a service for offsite opportunities? Am I in the data clean room space? I think there are lots of opportunities, but I think also lots of uncertainty on how to really bring this to the table. I think for ad tech, more broadly, it's it's a wonderful growth opportunity, but also it is, how do I really differentiate? And how can I bring my expertise in programmatic, for instance, into the retail media space? What is different? How would an SSP set up or look differently on a retailer than on a publisher? How many SSPs would a retailer have on page? Just one, or is it like 10 or a dozen plus as on a publisher? And then for retailers, I mean, Bab's research was extremely comprehensive about, it goes from staffing challenges to pushback maybe from e-com teams. It's about how do I increase pricing, how do I optimize yield, and also I think fundamentally, how do I get more value out of my existing customers, and how do I reduce the reliance on single big spenders? Like if your grocery store, am I totally reliant on Unilever or Mondelez, or how can I diversify that? Maybe through D2C brands or through non-endemics. Those are, I think, some of the challenges that everybody in the ecosystem is facing.
Yeah, great summary. Thank you. Justin, do you want to follow up on that in terms of the retailer challenge?
No, it was enormous, elaborate, Daniel. I think you covered everything, but I can add a little bit from let's say the retailer perspective then, because and I would say I think the biggest promise of let's say retail media or commerce media is the first party data, right? And if because that's and I think the biggest challenge, in fact, is how are you able to deliver on the first party data? Are you able to gather it and make it actionable as well, what I said earlier? Because it takes quite some thorough consents, especially in Europe, to gather that data and to be able to use it. So I think that's a big challenge for all the retailers in order to make this work and in order to, well, differentiate from other media companies. And the second thing is, we're talking about media here and media companies and challenging, let's say, the existing channels. Bol.com just made quite recently the shift to become a media platform instead of only an e-commerce platform. And I think retailers, they also need to have a mind shift that they have to change towards more a media, to become more a publisher, for example. And that's really something that takes some time. So that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point, that shift in mindset, Justin. So thank you for bringing that up. Christina, I saw you kind of smiling and at Daniel's agency challenges. Anything to challenge there or to add?
No, I think
or delete.
I think it's interesting perspective. It's not necessarily new challenges. I think there's one big challenge in the space that we talk about in the working groups quite a bit, and we talk about in our small groups, but I actually haven't heard brought up explicitly yet, which is walled gardens. Commerce media, I'm going to use the term commerce media instead of retail media, has, for all of the good things that it's done, also introduced about 700 new walled gardens. We used to talk about 1 or 2 players in the space. Now every single retailer has their own different way of defining something, their own different way of measuring something, their own different way of executing something. And it's, when I was hearing, the reason I was smiling when Daniel was presenting that, when I was hearing a lot of those challenges, they're not necessarily new challenges. A lot of our role is helping to navigate that, whether it's through technology and ad tech, whether it's through execution, whether it's through strategy, whether it's through planning. It's very, very, very difficult to actually think about how all of these things come together. And, it's part art, part science. And then also, I really do see a huge need right now for marketers to come together and to use their collective buying power to help drive the roadmap of the industry. And that's something that, we saw in programmatic 10 to 12 years ago, as we started hearing more and more marketers talk about viewable impressions and how important that was to them. And we saw a huge shift in the industry. And I think now is kind of the time for all of us who are buying on these walled gardens to start coming together and to start saying, this is what we expect in order to be able to deliver on our goals and to continue investing at the rate that you want us to invest in.
Thanks. Babs, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a pretty comprehensive coverage of it, and at the risk of sort of repeating a couple of the points, the one thing that I would I'd sort of add to, and I guess sort of follow on from Christina's point, is that fragmentation, I think, is potentially one of our biggest breakdowns. You know, we've seen this as sort of new industries and new sectors have developed over time. You know, there's that immediate land grab of all these companies who, you know, build their own solutions, and they start to offer out their own versions of doing what essentially is a version of what lots of different people do. And I think we will, you know, that is just going to introduce challenges to people like Christina and her peers, because you now have to navigate multiple different workflows to, you know, how do I deliver this campaign working within this specific walled garden, or how do I deliver this campaign, you know, using, you know, all the way down to, you know, the multiple logins that you need for the multiple platforms that you need to access, you know. And I think that level of confusion probably is a little bit inevitable, just given the nature of our industry. But, you know, getting to a point where we can start to overcome that, and we start to get some sort of interoperability between how different platforms connect, or how we sort of measure and work through those challenges. I think that's kind of going to be key to make sure that we just don't put an unnecessary roadblock in front of us.
Yeah. Cool. Well, look, as per usual, I was far too ambitious with the number of questions we'd get through. So I'm going to jump to the last question because I'm conscious of time, and we're probably going to start losing people. So just finally, obviously we talked about all the opportunities, the data, you know, the challenges in terms of the walled gardens and the fragmentation. But how do you think this landscape is going to look in 12 months' time? Is it going to look any different? And if so, how is it going to look? And I'm going to start with Justin, if that's okay.
That's a risk, right? How it's going to look. I'm opportunistic a little bit here. So I would say within 12 months, it's evolving that rapidly. I think in 12 months' time, we would say, I would hope that we're really going to be part of the media mix, I would say. So
great. Babs?
I agree. I'm an eternal optimist as well, Justin. So I join you there. But, you know, I think we're all in the right part of the industry. You know, we're definitely in that upward trajectory. And, you know, my view in 12 months, I think, you know, as well as all of the various changes that we're likely going to see around kind of standardization and some sort of commonality in the industry generally, I think one of the key things, and one of the really interesting things, will be the way talent emerges. You know, as these companies start to break out their own specific sort of retail media or commerce media organizations within their wider organizations, I think that's going to be really interesting to see as we start to gather those you know, those like-minded sort of kind of leaders in this space to really define how the industry moves forward.
Yeah. Christina?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't have that much to add to what I just heard from fellow panelists. I think the talent point is a really, really interesting one. And I think it's super, super critical right now, because we are not only seeing the retailers build up offerings, but we're also seeing advertisers try to figure out how they take advantage of these offerings. So it's a very new space, and I think it's a very different skill set than what we've previously seen.
Thanks. And Daniel?
I think we still see more retailers pushing in the market with new offerings. So we see more fragmentation, but at the same time, more consolidation and collaboration happening at the same time, as people realize there needs to be scale, or at least common standards to transact in a better way. Beyond the talent point, which I think is absolutely key. Also, another one, before we can even talk about offsite, really, it's about demand generation for retailers. And I think that in 12 months' time, we'll see many more retailers in advanced discussions with SSPs, or having an SSP on page, than today.
Thanks. Cool. Well, thanks so much to my expert panel, to Babs, Justin, Daniel, and Christina. And I'm just going to close by saying, if you want to know more about retail media, want to be part of the conversation and help, you know, drive this ecosystem forward, we do have a retail media working group, so feel free to get in touch to find out more about that. And we are hosting another retail media event in April, the 18th of April. So again, hopefully we'll have a few more answers at that point, and be able to drive the whole ecosystem forward a bit more. So thanks so much to everyone for joining. Thanks again to my panel, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you very much for hosting, Marie Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.